listeners. Welcome to Grief Out Loud. Remember the last time you tried to talk about grief and suddenly everybody left the room? Grief Out Loud is opening up this often avoided conversation because grief is hard enough without having to go through it alone. We bring you a mix of personal stories, tips for supporting children, teens, and yourself, and interviews with professionals in the grief world. Platitude and cliche-free, we promise. Grief Out Loud is hosted by me, Jana DeCristofaro, and produced by Dougy Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. Hey listeners, some of you have asked how you can best support this show, so I've got two things you can do. One, leave us a rating and a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you listen, really. And two, you can donate to the show and to Dougy Center by heading to dougy.org/grief-out-loud, and there you'll scroll down to the green donate button. So thanks for asking how you can help. This episode is the first in a series of interviews focused on grieving the death of a friend. As much as we might decry there being a hierarchy of grief, most people still assume that the death of a family member is harder than the death of a friend. In reality, though, the death of a friend or a chosen family member can be absolutely devastating, sometimes in ways that catch us and other people off guard. This interview with Mel and Annette seems like the exact right one to start this series. As some background, Mel and I know each other in the non-podcast world. We meet up each week to walk the hills of our neighborhood volcano, which, don't worry, it's extinct, and we talk about pretty much everything. And something that comes up almost every single time is Amy. Amy and Mel met way back in the 1990s and became the best of friends. Amy died in 2012 of pulmonary fibrosis, a lung disease. And even though I never met Amy, it's really clear just how powerful their connection is, almost 12 years after her death. When I asked Mel if she'd be a guest and share Amy with all of us, she said yes, but only if their friend Annette could join us too. Annette and Amy and Mel are all ASL, American Sign Language interpreters, who met through school and work. The three of them knew each other, but Mel and Annette had separate friendships with Amy, equally deep and formative and meaningful. Throughout Amy's illness and then her death, Annette and Mel's friendship solidified in a new way, because they now shared not just their love for Amy, but a mutual understanding of the heart-wrench it was to lose her. Mel and Annette are funny and earnest and generous with their love of Amy and the grief they carry in her physical absence. Okay, here's our conversation. Mel and Annette, thanks for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for inviting us, Jenna.
And I know we're going to talk all about your friend Amy, and I wondered if you could start by each sharing 3 words you'd use to describe Amy. And we need listeners to kind of get used to who's who. So Annette, do you want to start?
Glad to. Amy was hilarious, larger than life, and showed us, I know this is more than 3 words, how to be authentic in ways that was wise beyond her years.
This is Mel. I was going to say something similar. I said bigger than life. And Amy could hold space. Like she just could hold space for others.
And as this happens, right, when someone dies, we tend to go to all the glowing positive things. I'm wondering if each of you might want to share, I don't know, a characteristic of that made Amy really human, or maybe something that irked you about her.
When we say bigger than life, I mean, her feelings were bigger too, right? Like she had passion that was huge. She had anger that was big. She had sadness that was, could get very encompassing.
Yeah, she had big feels, and those could come out in all the ways. She has an Italian side of her family, and and in some ways very stereotypically in that passion. And so yeah, we fought like sisters sometimes. And so it was a friendship that was deeper than just niceties.
Mm. That you could have those tough times and those tensions or those fights and come back together.
There was repair. Yeah.
I mean, she was definitely my roadmap on how to be in relationship with other people, because early at a young age, I was like having to apologize to people or try to understand somebody at a deeper way to, like Annette said, make those repairs or to move past things. So definitely learn to fumble through how to communicate with people that wasn't blood family at a younger age. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd never thought about it before that term larger than life, which when I hear that, I always think like effusive and funny and sort of like life of any party. But also that personality like takes up a lot of space too, takes up a lot of room.
Yeah. And in that way too, like very magnetic, just I think I'm old enough now to think about what the word charisma means and the ways in which you can really just see how some people are so attractive and have an underlying magnetism. And Amy had that. Yeah.
So how did you each get, using that analogy, like a drawn in magnetized Amy? Like how did you each meet her?
So we went to Western Oregon University and we were all studying to be interpreters. And the really remarkable thing about our program, in many ways, there were lots of remarkable things, was that it was a cohort program and there were less than 20 of us in each of the cohorts. And so it led to really getting to know a core group of people very closely, because for 2 years we were just in all the same classes together. And so Amy was the year ahead of me and Mel was the year below me. And so when I first traveled out to Oregon, I was living in Texas at the time, to consider going to the interpreting program at Western. Amy was one of the very first people that I met, and her bright glow in the classroom, I attended a couple of classes, was so memorable that the next year when I came to the program to attend it, I can remember seeking her out and then getting to know her in the years that I attended the program, and going to classes together, going to parties at her house, getting really intimately involved in the friendship circle.
And I would say I met Amy from a different route. I had moved to Oregon from Kirkland, Washington, and I was hired on as an ASL interpreter at a juvenile correction facility. And my first day on the job, I'm walking down, and it's like very compounds and everything. And I see this person sitting on a patch of grass with the sun shining on her, eating brown rice from a ceramic bowl with chopsticks. And I'm basically a city girl. I'm right out of Seattle. And I'm like, what the heck is
Hippie.
This person? I've heard of these hippies. I found one in the wild, right? And
natural habitat.
Natural habitat, right? And of course, she has all the contraband possible, ceramic and whatever, but it was her lunch break, so it was okay. So I just, went right up to her and it's like, hi, who are you? Again, that magnetic personality would just draw people to her. And I found out that she was one of the other ASL interpreters. She had to be. She was the only one not in a uniform. She kind of just literally took me under her wing from that moment on. Kind of like Annette said, learned how to be friends, would go to events together, definitely professionally as interpreters, but also more like older sister, younger sister, friendship, group relationships.
And is Amy how the two of you met?
I don't know that Amy is how we met, but Amy is certainly how I believe I became close to Mel. I mean, and Mel and I were in each other's orbit by virtue of having this overlap of so many other people in our lives. I would say that Amy's death became a catalyst for closeness between me and Mel in a way that we had never been close before. Like we'd been in one another's periphery for, at that point, almost 20 years. And yet it forged what I would now call a sisterhood between us. That I didn't think of you, Mel, as my sister prior to that in the same way. I wonder how you think of that.
Same. You were the sparkly, shiny other group of friends that were hipper, as in more hippie than me. Following the Grateful Dead across the United States and making art and selling it, and also being a fabulous interpreter. And definitely hopped on that professional track before I was on the scene. But also, both of you guys having similar illnesses and you getting your diagnosis while I was so entrenched in Amy and caring for Amy and her sickness. And then, when as the friendship group, we realized you were also going down that pathway, a lot more discussion and talks and sharing of information, and compassion and empathy for each other, and creating that space for support. So I would say it started before Amy passed, but definitely through her illness, I would say that relationship started to emerge and get stronger and stronger.
Can you say a little bit more about the course of that? I mean, I think about the course of an illness, but it's like the course of an illness impacting a friend group. And then Annette, you also being diagnosed with the same illness that Amy had. So what do you each remember about that?
So Amy and I, very close friends, I don't know, starting in 1996, 97. I don't think we ever lived more than a couple miles away from each other. But then she did a stint in California and came back. And so very close. So we shared a doctor as the point of that. And so I remember saying, hey, you have had this cough and the shortness of breath for a while. I think you need to go see Sarah. And at that time, all of us are ASL sign language interpreters. And what was it? There was the big thing that came to the Oregon School for the Deaf where they remodeled one of the school's dorms, and it was a TV show, and I can't remember the name of it right now. Annette, do you remember it?
No, but I remember that happening. Yeah, it wasn't like Trading Space. Yeah, I don't remember what it was. Yeah.
Right. It's like, extreme home makeover or something like that. Like they came in and they renovated the whole thing, and a cruise of interpreters, and Amy had to park a little bit further away. And she was very alarmed that by the time it took her to park her car and walk to where she needed to be, like she had to sit down, like she had to take a 30-minute break. It just she wasn't recovering as well as she should have. And she's a very active physical person. Like she was a forest firefighter, like shortness of breath. This was, she was alarmed. And so we made the referral, and the doctor saw her for months, and they still couldn't quite pinpoint what was going on. And because she was very young, she was 41, kind of about that age when the onset of this started to become alarming. From there, lung biopsy and getting more and more information, but it was so rare and so kind of not in what people's radar would be for somebody with this physical makeup of a strong, healthy, vibrant person. It took time, and it took probably longer than it should have because of the severity of how fast she deteriorated. But it was it wasn't in your normal makeup of diseases for this age group. I think I forgot the question because I got caught up in the story, and I'm sorry.
I'll take it from here. So Amy's progression of her disease. So she was diagnosed with idiopathic interstitial pulmonary fibrosis. And she went from, so Amy was always like curvy goddess body. And she was also kind of a role model for, Mel and I kind of each have that body type too. And Amy was somebody who in her 20s was not afraid of her thighs. And what a revelation, because especially in today's world where you're not taught to embrace your curves. she was such a godsend and just like showing us a path for loving the skin you're in. Her disease advanced so rapidly that within 6 months of diagnosis, she was referred for a double lung transplant. And within a year of diagnosis, she went from probably 175 pounds to 105 pounds, wearing oxygen full time. And the deterioration was so abrupt, rapid, thorough. And it wasn't long before she wasn't able to work. She, was having difficulty sleeping and bathing herself and completing just basic life tasks. And her folks who lived nearby were there on the daily, making sure that she was getting basic nutrition and helping her husband care for her. And our closest transplant hospital is in Seattle, and she was living in Portland. So even just the burden of getting to appointments was real. I'm kind of smiling to myself because at the time that she was losing weight, of course, all of us who loved her were trying to find creative ways to feed her. And she was like, if one more person tells me to like drink a smoothie or eat an avocado, I'm going to lose my mind. And I was there one day when Mel came over with a tub of chocolate cream cheese. She actually thoughtfully brought 2 of them because she was like, maybe this will be delicious and you'll want to eat this. And the first one that Amy opened up, Mel had already eaten the whole container. It was like all empty except for one bite. And I was like, yeah, good job feeding her, Mel.
I tried.
So
I really tried.
So it was like that.
Oh yeah, and then she was on a feeding tube towards. I mean, it digressed fast.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
And her Tia, everybody making like almond cracker, like the more calorie you could put into any dish, people were like, I'll put in more nuts, I'll put in butter, I'll put olive oil, let's do it. She's like, yeah.
And so just watching our friend waste away. And Amy started trying to lead conversations with us about what we wanted when she would die. Like, what of mine do you want? And we were not prepared. I was not prepared. I batted those conversations away. I actively tried to do the I want you. I don't want you to be gone. There's nothing of yours I need and want. I want you to get better. And I can remember she started watching the television program called The Universe about like the galaxy and the planets. And like looking back now, I can see, that quest for, what's going to happen to me, what's out there that's bigger than me, what will become of me because she knew where this was going, and that if she wasn't able to get strong enough, I mean, at the point that she died, needing a heart and at that point, I mean, a lung and at that point, a heart transplant, she wasn't strong enough to receive them. And so she saw the writing on the wall, and we were young and naive enough to really not be prepared to emotionally go there with her.
I remember text messages going back and forth on the last trip before she was transferred up to UW, and she was, I'm not ready to die. I don't want to be the friend that dies. Me, you, and Annette still have to go to India together. This isn't how it's supposed to end. And me just being like, oh, it's going to happen. You're going to get the lungs. You'll get the heart. And just to like what Annette was saying, she definitely saw the writing on the wall in some ways. And I wish I was as sweet as Annette. But when Amy was like, what of mine do you want? I was like, oh, I want you. So I want everything that smells like you, looks like you, feels like you. And so, definitely just create my own little nest of her stuff. Yeah.
Do you all remember, was there a time when each of you kind of got the message?
Um, when she asked me to be her medical power of attorney, shit got real because now I had forms to sign and I had to do my learning about what that meant and then have those conversations with Amy. And when she set up her parameters of like, I want to make sure my husband's there, my family's there, who can be there. And then, I don't want any stoic measures and, any life-sustaining measures. And having those conversations of like, well, what does that mean? Like if you're intubated or not intubated and kind of getting down into the nitty-gritty. And that conversation happened over a course of a couple of weeks. And I, have one and then go back and have more questions, come back and have more questions. And that is when I kind of had to shift into more of business mode, Mel, too.
And Mel, that was about like 4 months before she died, 6 months, four.
It was early summer, and I know and then she
Yep.
passed in November. So yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I remember when that happened and talking with Amy. I don't remember if I talked with you about some of the questions that prompted and what it meant to have a DNR and like the sobering reality of choosing, I will not be resuscitated if shit goes sideways. And still, not wanting to see that for the very real marker in time that it was. So right about August, I guess, October, somewhere in there, during one of Amy's trips to the hospital, I was not yet an iPhone user, but I got an iPod that had the capacity to FaceTime. And my very first FaceTime call was to Amy in the hospital. And, folks, this is 2012, so FaceTime was still relatively new. And remembering her being just like all eyeballs, just so withered, so wasted, and getting off that call and just sobbing. And I think that for me was the first acknowledgement that unless something really big shifted, there was no way out of where this was headed.
Just again to reiterate Annette's description of Amy being, very, it was at the end, it was a 90-pound or closer to 100-pound weight loss. And to have that happen so quickly, she was all eyeballs and then smile, teeth and at the end.
Teeth and eyeballs.
Teeth and eyeballs. And, when you look at pictures of her before and after, it's like you don't even want to look at the ones that were towards the end because it just didn't represent who she feel like that's who she was. She was this big personality, the Italian mother who wanted to make you pasta from scratch and feed you and send you home with Tupperware food and party and celebrate life. And to see it was such a stark contrast. It's jarring.
I had planned to ask you, what did Amy mean to each of you? But I'm going to change that question. You can still answer that one if you want. But what do you think you meant to Amy? Like, what did she go to each of you for that may have been similar or different?
I'm so curious, Annette, about what your answer is going to be.
I guess you better go first then, Mel.
Me? Oh, what did Amy mean or what I meant to Amy? Jeez, I was definitely the sister she wished she had. Her two brothers, I tell you. I was definitely the younger sister. I was somebody that looked up to her, that she was sharing guidance and knowledge with, but also a confidant. I knew all her secrets. I was that safe space for her to share with. I could see the ugly side and still come back in the morning and give her a hug and know that we were solid for sure. And we, like I said, we live so close to each other. It was, do you have a cup of sugar? Yeah, I'll be there in 2 minutes. You know, hey, I'm bored. Okay, be there in 2 minutes. So just daily support and the everyday little things, but also in the big things.
Yeah. As Mel referenced, she had no sisters. And so we were her sisters. And I'm queer. And so the idea of family of choice was really important to me from that point of time in our lives. And even though Amy wasn't, she modeled that beautifully. And we were her sisters. And I agree that Mel was definitely that little sister. Mel also is not able to keep a secret about anything. And so um,
That's
Amy,
a secret.
so Amy went to Mel for anything that had to do with having a good time. And for sure, they were one another's daily groove and joy. I think that Amy and I shared a bit more of a spiritual groove in our lives, and sometimes could go to darker, harder places together and talk about, yeah, I mean, like we shared really difficult things about our marriages, and we shared our fears, and I mean, we really, there was no holds barred.
And Annette, one of the other difficult things that you and Amy shared is that you were diagnosed with the same illness.
It's true. Yeah, and I got my diagnosis almost exactly a year after she died. Um, which of course was terrifying because the only other person I knew with the illness I'd watched just die in such a terrible way right in front of me. My illness also progressed really rapidly. Within 6 months, I'd lost 70% of my lung function, and I too was on the lung transplant list, living on oxygen, 60 pounds lighter than I had been. And ironically, because our only transplant hospital is Seattle, walking the same halls, sitting in the same offices, going to the same doctors as Amy. And my story has not gone the same way as Amy's. In addition to having survivor guilt around that, there have been times where being around Amy's closest family members has been hard because there's still understandable such grief and anger about, like, why would there be solutions for Annette when there wasn't for Amy? I also have a very clear sense from some times where I myself was close to death that I have a really strong angel on the other side, that Amy has had a hand in me still being here. And I'm not invested in anyone else believing that or necessarily understanding it or knowing that it's true, but it's true for me, and that matters to me.
Mel, what do you remember about hearing the news that Annette was diagnosed with the same illness as Amy?
Again, it was we could see Annette deteriorating in front of our eyes, just like we saw Amy. And it was the scab hadn't even really formed yet with Amy's passing. And to hear the official diagnosis, I mean, you couldn't rock the world twice in less than a year, but I guess you can. And what we had learned from Amy's disease and Annette is she is in her person, also trying to support and witness everything Annette had to go through with the fear of this now known reality looming in front of her has been an honor to be by Annette's side to see it and how she's navigated this space and time and her illnesses. They were unique and really different. And I think early on we started a mantra around like Amy, your story is your story. Amy's story was Amy's story. And they don't have to be the same. And really holding true to that. Um, I never was like, why Amy versus Annette? I was just thankful for both of them being in my life. They both have given me big gifts. And being with somebody as they pass, but also people with chronic illness and being by their side for the long haul. It's both of them have really changed my lens on life and how you show up for people. Yeah.
Well, and I mean, we kind of alluded to it earlier, but I just want to say explicitly that one of the, God, it feels dark to use this word, but the truth is that one of the gifts of Amy's death is the solidification of a couple of key friendships. I mean, there's a group on a text thread that's me and Mel and two other people that we were all in each other's lives prior to Amy's passing. But in the wake of Amy's passing, our reliance on one another, our leaning and caring for one another and tending to our grief together has just given us the gift of each other in a way that I don't know if our friendship would have grown and developed and strengthened in the ways that it has had it not been for losing Amy. I mean, Mel and I are bonded to one another and lean on each other in ways that are so much more tight now than they were prior to Amy, in part because we needed each other so much in the time after her. It was such a loss and such a vacuum, and we were so hurting. We were in so much pain and so desperate that to turn to one another because we understood what the other one was going through was necessary and important. And out of that, we came to know each other so much better than we had prior.
As you were talking, Annette, I got this image of candles sitting on a plate together before you light any of the candles, and they're all separate, but they're sharing the same plate. And then if you light one candle and it melts down, that wax oftentimes will connect and join the other candles, when it melts into the flat of the plate. So it's kind of a strange image, but that's what I was picturing, is that as Amy's death, as her life transformed into something different, it brought you all together in that way.
There's an alchemy in that. Yeah, agreed. And I think she's looking down still and she lives on in that.
My family of origin, my sisters and my mom would often comment on our friendship and kind of surprised by the intensity of it and the closeness of it. And then in Amy's passing, how that friendship kind of actually got bigger with more people because of being closer with the 4 people that Annette was talking to, or 3 people on the text stream, 4 including me. How fortunate I am to have relationship with other people at a depth of being seen and feeling like I belong that I don't necessarily hear about or see from my family, like that sense of belonging or being connected to. yeah, I just feel very fortunate to have relationships to the depth and breadth that I do now. And it started with Amy when she was alive. I mean, we definitely, that path was there. And there's no going back once you have a relationship like that. That's what you want. The bar is set. And we do kind of hold each other accountable to that bar with each other. Like, girl calls me out on all my stuff. And yes, I told a lot of secrets before, but definitely have grown up big since the passing of Amy. And I'm learning and
Not
trying
always
to
the town crier.
no, now I'm just a town crier. But it definitely grew me up in a big way, her passing for sure. And yeah, changed what I wanted out of relationships and what I expected and how I wanted to show up for others.
Amy's death happened almost 12 years ago, right? 2012 is when she died. And I'm curious in that time, a decade and change, how have you each engaged with and disengaged with grief?
Amy was the first biggest loss of my life, right? Like I'd lost grandparents and I'd lost a friend in college, but of people who were so close to me. And so I started really understanding what it is to metabolize grief with Amy and how shocking it is, that the world keeps turning and that other people keep living their lives and that the mail keeps getting delivered and, that you're supposed to go to work the next day, just all that shit that's so out of pocket. I I learned a tradition from a friend of mine that has served me so well that I feel like I have to talk about it here, which is that I have a grief bowl. I take a bowl and I put salt water in it and I taste the salt water so that it's about the salinity of tears. And in that, I put a candle. And obviously, it's best if the candle is like inside of a glass or something, not just sitting in the naked water. And when I'm experiencing the grief, I light the candle and I ask it to bear the grief with me and for me. And when the time for the grief has passed, ideally, I dump the salt water somewhere on the earth and ask it to just take that grief on my behalf. And that candle was lit every day for more than a year. And then I noticed that I'd gone a day or two without lighting it. And at first, I felt guilty about that, right? There was this sense of like betraying my friend's honor or memory by not lighting the candle, and then realizing that there was relief in not feeling the intense heaviness of that being the first thing I felt when I woke up in the morning. Now, after a decade, feeling so much gratitude for having her in my life. I mean, I still have anger about the fact that I don't get to grow old with her because honestly, I think she was going to be the most spectacular old lady. And I was really excited about that. Um, but but I learned so much that has served me about loss and since then have experienced a lot more loss. And so the experience of losing Amy has been so valuable in losing a sibling, losing a parent, losing other people close to me. I still wish it wasn't what happened, but it's provided a help or at least a loose roadmap for how to endure other grief.
I when I was thinking about what to say for this question, I had a very similar response to Annette, in that it definitely was the roadmap, but because it was the first, I don't know if that set the bar for what grief meant for me or means to me. Um, I now welcome my grief waves as they wash over me, and they can come at any time, any place, and I shall leak tears. And I am thankful for them because it keeps me open. I think I recognize like who Mel was before Amy passed was, more shut down emotionally, definitely you know, growing into who I am and who I was going to be. And, um, but this put me on an emotional trajectory of what it means to be vulnerable, stay open, stay vulnerable. That I think maybe American society, specifically not having the amount of loss that other countries have experienced, we don't have a lot of practice in grief with each of my losses since then, again, parents and siblings and chosen son and so forth. It is a reminder of my humanity and what it means to love, and I welcome it. I'm thankful for it.
You each showed up today for this conversation with items, Amy items. I wondered if you each wanted to talk about those.
Well, I am wearing a vest that Amy's aunt, Tia Luann, wove for her, and it has a big star on the back. And Amy wore this for years. Um, and it's so when I wear it, it's like a little strength, little hug from Amy. But oh, you probably can't tell. I also have a pendant that I had made with her name on it in her handwriting. And then I have a necklace that Annette and Rebecca and Todd and I all share that we had made after Amy passed. So.
I am sitting here rubbing a piece of fused glass. Amy was quite crafty, and she eventually got a kiln and was experimenting with ways to fuse glass. And I think as friends, we were quite lucky that both her husband and her family allowed us to ask for things, to request and get things of hers. And in advance of our conversation today, I was thinking about that fact, and that I would be okay if I didn't have items of Amy's, and yet I'm grateful that I have them. And on days that I'm missing her or feeling like I want to channel her spirit or want to have her close, it's really nice to be able to put on a pair of her earrings or an item of her clothing and really feel imbued with having her near that way.
That makes me want to ask you all one more question. I was thinking what you'd said, Annette, of how feeling really grateful that Amy's family was open to you and the other friends having items of Amy's. And that one of the things that can happen for folks when a friend dies, that there can feel like there's this in crowd and out crowd, biological, married in family, in crowd, other friends, out crowd, right? And I just wondered for you all, it sounds like it was a different experience in that way. But in terms of when you meet other people and you share about Amy and share about her death, what's your sense of how much the grief you have matches or doesn't match with how much grief other people think maybe you should have or not have when it comes to a friend versus like a official family member? I say that in quotes because whose family often doesn't have anything to do with blood, but was there a question in there? Did I get there for you all? Sorry, that was a lot of words.
Annette, tell me what the question is.
I mean, it's the hierarchy of grief and who's allowed to feel the grief and whether or not that's honored or acknowledged, or if you feel, the permission to feel the grief you have, that, I mean, that's what I heard, I guess.
Well, Annette, would you like this is my experience, and I'm curious what the observation is. I think it's similar for, I mean, because Amy, how she was in life, she took us with her where she wanted us, and we were so in each other's lives and involved with each other that Amy's family knew about each and every one of us and the butt mole we have. Like there was no secrets. And we were talked about with each other's families on the daily. When people are asking about how I am, my mom and sister asking about how's Annette, how's Amy, like we were just so fortunate to have such a rich friendship. So that when Amy's passing and her illness happened, I mean, I was in touch with her mom and her aunt, daily. And so after she passed, I was in touch with her mom and her aunts daily. And still am very close with her mom and stay in touch with the brothers here and there and so forth. I think I didn't know that I wasn't supposed, that hierarchy of grieving, it was just so consuming. You just ignore it, right? Like can't put parameters on that. It definitely showed up with work when on week 3, I didn't want to go back. And people are like, come on now. And I'm like, no, not ready. So definitely there. And when meeting new people that didn't know Amy, because now enough time's gone by and the social circles have expanded and shifted, it's kind of interesting to see like how much do I share? How much do I bring this in? I did get a divorce through this whole process and have met a new partner. And from the get-go, negotiating space for Amy was part of that relationship, holding space for the stories, the tears, the birthdays, making a cake for somebody who's not here, but having to negotiate all that, and being very accepted for that. It just is who you are. It becomes part of your fabric as you move forward and navigate that space. I probably don't know about that hierarchy because I just ignored it. Jeez.
I mean, those were my words, the hierarchy of grief. But I agree that having Amy's family know about us, understand our relationships, be generous and accepting about them, made that a ton easier. And I also agree, Mel, that I watched you in forming your new partnership, bring Amy into that and weave it from the beginning, which was a beautiful thing to behold and not simple. As I heard you ask the question, Jana, I thought, I live with chronic illness and I don't meet a whole lot of new people on the reg. So I don't have to do a lot of the Amy splaining. But also, I think it's precious enough to me that unless somebody matters a lot to me, I don't explain it, in part because I don't care to have it be diminished or questioned because I understand that she was my sister. And if you wouldn't understand that, I'm not interested. Thank you. I don't want your feedback. But that certainly in our society, yes, families of choice are becoming more understood and more woven in. And we still prioritize families of origin in terms of relationships and grief.
So interesting to listen to both of you in the way that, for Mel, it sounds like you lead with Amy into new relationships, new friendships, just like the color of your hair or the color of your eyes. Like you meet me, you meet Amy. And for you, Annette, Amy's always with you, but you're like, you know what? I don't know if I'm going to share
I'm going to trust you with Amy.
I'm going to wait and see if you deserve to know about this or not. As we come to the end of our time together today, is there anything else either of you are like, oh, I really want listeners to know this about grieving when a friend dies?
I did think about this question, and it kind of dovetails nicely, Annette, to your comment about chosen family and so forth too, is grieving the loss of a friend, and somebody who you would feel as a sister or close, very close, like Amy was for Annette and I. Because it was chosen, because it was intentional, because I did put in the sweat and tears for somebody who wasn't my family and I had to, the loss of that was devastating. It crushed me. And the repair around that is still in the process, but also recognizing like, I'm not gonna, I mean, I am fortunate for my sisters and Todd, your sister, whatever, that I have the longevity of this group of people that went through this with me. But I mean, Amy and I had, was it, I felt like close to 20 years, but when I do the math, it's probably 17 years of active time in, and just knowing that that's not going to be recreated. Like, I'm not going to have the time. And now that I have family and career, like that time in our lives, I mean, college, I mean, we were just doing so much together, so many experiences together that it's a loss that's hard to talk about. It's different because it isn't chosen. I mean, it is chosen family, and it was intentional, and it bore the fruit of love and intention, and that work different than family does. That the loss is real, and there's not that many people out there to talk to about it. Like, a lot of people don't understand it, or for me, I've experienced that anyways, I would say. But I've been so fortunate to have a group of friends that does, and that I definitely turn to on the reg. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would say, and I'm gonna take a detour for a moment. So, about 5 years after I lost Amy, uh, my cousin, who is a year older than me, um, died of a really rare cancer. And this cousin, they were kind of the outsider of their family, which is sort of how I identify as well. And uh, they we were really close. And so that loss for me was also very devastating. And in the wake of that loss, I reached out to their best friend. We get together on occasion when we're able to. We don't live in the same city. And so it's been so healing to have someone else to share those stories with, to remember them with, to be like, oh my God, do you remember when they and so I would say that I guess because of that, and then also because of the ways that Mel has become such an integral part of my life, I would say if you lose a dear friend and there is someone else who is also there grieving that you know a little bit and you feel at all inclined to reach out to in your grief, do it. Because I wouldn't say that grief shared is necessarily grief divided, but I would say that it's sometimes easier to carry that burden together, at least. And there may be a beautiful friendship ahead. And at the very least, you're shouldering the burden together, if not building something that might serve you into the future. And so look, look around in the midst of that devastation to be like, okay, is there someone else here that I've thought maybe we could get coffee together, or we've done things together as a group and I can reach out to them too, even if it's just sending a text in the midst of my heartbreak.
I love that, Annette, because I was thinking about how in friendships, it's almost like you build a little world together. And if that person dies, you want to connect with the other people who have visited that world as well, because it's a unique world that maybe other people can't understand the language or recognize what the weather is like or know how to dress for it or anything like that.
Agreed.
Well, thank you both so much. It's such a tender thing to share about a relationship that is just so heartful for both of you.
Thanks for letting us talk about Amy. And
Love it. Thank you, Jana.
And listeners out there, I am going to link in the show notes, so be sure to check it out. Annette has her own podcast. So if you want to hear more from Annette, you can connect through her podcast. And what's the name of your podcast again, Annette?
Chronic Wellness, about how to live well with chronic pain and illness.
So that will be in the show notes. And listeners, I know you're really tired of me saying this, but thank you for being part of the show, for making it mean something, for sharing episodes with people who you think might be interested in what we are talking about here. If you want to, you can reach out to me directly at griefoutloud@dougy.org. That's DOUGY.org. That's our website where you can find free downloadable resources, all information about our local Portland programming, and each and every episode of Grief Out Loud. I'm excited as always to share that our podcast is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund. Thanks again for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time.